Let them hate, and as long as they fear. That's quite the opening line, isn't it?
It really is, attributed to Caligula, the Roman emperor. It's actually the logo for the group we're looking at today.
Definitely sets a tone, a pretty dark one. Welcome, everyone, to the deep dive.
Yeah, that quote tells you a lot up front about maybe intimidation being key.
Right. And today we're digging into the organization known as White Aryan Resistance, or WAR.
Uh-huh. War.
Our main source here is a document called whitearyanresistance.pdf. It outlines, well, a pretty disturbing history.
It does. We're talking about a white supremacist neo-Nazi group started in the U.S. by Tom Metzger back in 1983.
Originally based in Warsaw, Indiana, interestingly.
Yeah, and what's kind of notable is that they actually incorporated it as a business.
A business, wow. That suggests a certain level of planning, maybe? Ambition?
You could say that.
Oh, yeah.
And they didn't stay just in Indiana. By 93, they'd branched out into Canada.
And Metzger himself, back in 1988, he didn't mince words. He called war openly white racist.
No ambiguity there.
Hmm.
So our goal today isn't just to define them, but to really unpack the history. Where did they come from? What did they do? What was their impact?
Exactly. Trying to get a clearer picture of something that's, frankly, pretty complex and troubling.
Definitely troubling.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning then. Tom Metzger himself, his involvement seems to predate war quite a bit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Back in the mid-70s, he was leading a group called the White Brotherhood.
The White Brotherhood.
Okay, that was sort of his entry point before he jumped over to David Duke's Knights of the Ku Klux Klan in '75.
And he moved up the ranks there?
Pretty quickly, yeah.
Yeah.
By 1979, he was the Grand Dragon for the whole California realm.
And the California KKK under him? It sounds like they weren't exactly low-key. The source mentions unofficial border patrols.
Yeah, down on the Mexican border, it paints a picture of them being very proactive, almost paramilitary.
Wow.
Plus, they had this security detail, guys in black shirts who apparently got into skirmishes, anti-Klan demonstrators, even the police. There was a specific incident mentioned in Oceanside, California, 1980. 30 members involved, 7 people injured.
So pretty confrontational. Even within the KKK structure, you can kind of see how he might eventually break off.
Exactly. And he did. Summer of 1980, he leaves the National KKK, starts his own thing, the California Knights of the Ku Klux Klan.
Giving him more control, presumably?
Probably. More autonomy to push his specific agenda.
And that earlier group, the White Brotherhood, the document mentions them harassing Hispanic people, Chinese Americans, Vietnamese refugees.
Yeah, it shows a pattern, doesn't it? A consistent targeting of minorities right from his early days in these movements.
It really does. A clear line of racial hostility.
And it's interesting to trace how the name of his main organization changed over time, too.
Right, so after the California Knights, he shifts gears a bit.
In '82, he forms the White American Political Association, WAPA.
WAPA, okay, so trying politics.
Yeah, seems like it. Promoting pro-white candidates, that was the stated goal. Trying to work within the system, maybe.
But that didn't pan out.
Nope. He ran in the '82 California Senate Democratic primary, actually.
Democratic. Interesting.
Yeah, but he lost. And that seems to be when he kind of gave up on the electoral path.
So then what?
Then WAPA gets rebranded. In '83, it becomes White American Resistance.
Almost. Oh.
Most. And then the final change, adding Aryan. White Aryan Resistance. The document says this was to signal a more revolutionary stance.
Aryan, that word choice is obviously very deliberate, very loaded.
Extremely. It ties directly into Nazi ideology, that whole fabricated history of racial purity. It's moving beyond just American nationalism to this broader global white supremacist identity.
Okay, so the group is formed, the name is set. How did they get their message out? Propaganda, outreach.
Well, one major tool, especially in the late '80s, was a public access TV show.
Public access, really?
Yeah, called Race and Reason. Metzger used it to just broadcast war propaganda, interview other neo-Nazis.
What kind of guests are we talking about?
All sorts. Anti-abortion speakers, Holocaust deniers. It was a platform for a real mix of extremist views.
And I bet that caused some controversy.
Oh, huge controversy.
Really?
Which, probably just got them more attention in a twisted sort of way.
Yeah, that's often how it works, sadly. Were there other methods?
Definitely. They had something called the War Hotline, a phone number you could call for a recorded message.
Like an answering machine message?
Basically, yeah. And a message from 1988 that's quoted in the document is, well, it's incredibly revealing and chilling.
What did it say? Can we break that down?
Sure. It starts off bluntly. We are an openly white racist movement. Just lays it right out there.
No hiding it.
None.
Yeah.
Then it specifically welcomes skinheads into the fold. Shows who they were trying to recruit, younger, maybe more aggressive members.
Okay. What else?
Dia calls the federal government the #1 enemy of our race. That's pretty standard anti-government rhetoric for these kinds of groups.
Right. Demonizing authority.
But then it gets even more extreme. It talks about the need to cleanse this nation of all non-white mud races.
Ugh. Mud races. Vile.
Absolutely dehumanizing language. And then, maybe the most disturbing part,
Go on.
it directly references the SS in Nazi Germany. It says something like, well, by God, the SS did it in Germany. We can do it right here in the streets of America.
Wow. Just openly admiring the SS and suggesting similar actions in the U.S.
Exactly. It's a direct call to emulate genocidal methods.
Yeah.
That hotline message, it's just raw, unfiltered war ideology. No question about their hate or their violent goals.
Which unfortunately leads us to a truly awful event. The murder of Mulugeta Serra in 1988.
Yeah. November 13th, 1988. Mulugeta Serra, he was an Ethiopian immigrant here to study. He was beaten to death in Portland, Oregon.
By who?
3 white supremacists. They were part of a group called Eastside White Pride.
And the link to war.
The document states Eastside White Pride allegedly had ties to war. Whether direct instruction or just influence, that link was key. Because the Southern Poverty Law Center, the SPLC, used that connection. They sued Tom Metzger, his son John Metzger, and war itself on behalf of Serra's family.
A civil suit.
Correct. And in October 1990, they won. A judgment of U.S. $12.5 million.
$12.5 million. That's huge. That must have crippled war, right?
You'd think so.
Yeah.
But the reality was different. The Metzgers just didn't have that kind of money.
So the family didn't get the full amount?
Not even close, tragically.
Yeah.
They ended up getting the assets from the Metzgers' house, maybe $125,000 worth, and some cash. That was about it.
And the Metzgers.
Declared bankruptcy. But here's the thing. War itself,
Right.
the organization, it kept going.
Right.
They were still publishing a newspaper afterwards.
That's kind of unbelievable despite that massive judgment.
It really shows the limits of using financial penalties to shut down hate groups. It can hurt them, yes, but dismantle them entirely. Much harder.
And the cost of that trial must have been enormous.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars. The SPLC and the Anti-Defamation League, ADL, actually absorbed those costs. It takes significant resources to fight these legal battles.
And Metzger just kept going after bankruptcy.
Pretty much. Launched a website in '97, started an internet radio show, just adapted to new media. The ideology found new channels.
It's persistent. Were there other incidents mentioned in the source besides the Serra murder?
Yeah, a couple of others worth noting. One instance involved a war member threatening video stores in Rhode Island.
For what?
For carrying the Spike Lee movie Jungle Fever.
Seriously? Over a movie?
Yeah, just shows how petty and pervasive the racism could be.
Yeah.
Trying to censor culture like that.
Okay, what else?
Then there was a guy named Richard Campos, identified as a war sympathizer.
Right.
In 1994, he was convicted for racially motivated bombing plots. At the time, there were claims these were done by some group called the Aryan Liberation Front.
Another group.
Well, it turned out Campos was the Aryan Liberation Front. He was the only member.
A lone wolf, essentially, but radicalized by the ideology.
Exactly. He got a 17-year prison sentence in early '95. Shows the danger of individuals acting violently based on this stuff, even if not formally directed by the main group.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive on white Aryan resistance, what are the main things we should take away?
Well, first, I think, is seeing how war grew out of older movements, like the KKK.
Yeah.
It shows this kind of lineage of hate that keeps adapting.
Right, it doesn't just appear out of nowhere.
Exactly. Second, their methods evolved, didn't they? From public access TV and phone hotlines to the internet later on, they kept finding ways to spread the message.
Always looking for an outlet.
And maybe the biggest takeaway is the real-world violence. The Mulugeta Serra murder is the most horrific example, but it highlights the genuine danger these ideologies pose.
Yeah. And the lawsuit, while it didn't bankrupt them completely, it was still a significant stand against them, even if the financial recovery was limited.
It sent a message, for sure. But the group's survival, even in a diminished form, shows how hard these things are to eradicate completely.
So understanding this history, the tactics, the impact, it feels important for understanding extremism today, even if war itself isn't as prominent.
Absolutely. It gives context. The specifics change, the platforms change. But understanding how groups like war operated helps us recognize and hopefully counter similar ideologies now.
Which leads to maybe a final thought for people listening. Given that these kinds of extremist ideas are still around, maybe just in different forms, how do we as individuals or as a society effectively push back against them? How do we stop that kind of hate from leading to violence like we saw with war?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
How do you counter the message and prevent the violence? It's something we definitely still need to be thinking about and working on.